Hey, Ali, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you. Really pleased to be here and to be doing this video together for everybody who's trying to recover from chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing this for a little while, and it's just a really great opportunity. I'm so grateful that you're donating some of your time and all of the energy, and I know that you put a lot of thought into preparing for this video, and you're taking it very seriously, and you know how much people are struggling. So, yeah, I'm just really grateful for you doing this. And it's wonderful to be able to share your story because not only have you lived with and had a journey with chronic fatigue
Mhm.
syndrome or ME, CFS, but you've also fully recovered. And that's just
Mhm.
so incredible to see. So, yeah, so why don't we just dive right in?
Okay, yes, sounds good.
Take us
Yeah.
back to how this all started or before it started, whatever is a good starting
Well,
point for you.
so before it started, I was very physically fit. I was doing lots of walking, lots of running, lots of cycling. My holidays were all about trekking, carrying all my camping stuff, and cycling, carrying all my camping stuff. My work situation was difficult though. I was a career coach, which sounds great, except I wasn't a very successful career coach. I was really quite stuck, and I was doing maybe about rather than the 30, 40, 50 hours I needed to do, I was maybe only doing 8 to 10 hours a week. So that part of my life was very quiet, but I was still very physically fit.
Okay, so overall, it kind of sounds like things were going well, working, feeling well, active.
So, yeah, certainly physically, I was very physically well. Mentally, I was possibly in a trickier space.
Okay. Okay. So what happened? Did you start, how did this whole journey with MECFS unfold for you?
So I wasn't doing that much, but then I got myself a mentor who had to help with my business. So I started doing more hours. And I thought, well, hang on a sec, that's not right. I'm feeling really tired from a busy day, but not a really busy day. And I talked to my mentor, and he said, "We'll go off and see your doctor, and maybe go and see a nutritionist." And I went to see the doctor, and they went sent off and did all these blood tests. And I went back to see her for the results, and she said, "We can't find anything." And I said, "Oh," and walked away. And I'm like, to this day, thinking, why didn't I push? But I didn't at that time. And it's a whole part of my story, this reluctance. But I did go and see a naturopath. And at that point, I was already on a vegetarian diet, but I just made it very healthy, lots of whole foods, checking all the labels on anything that I bought, hardly any, lots of home cooking, and increased my vegetables and things like that. So that was there and is still there. But it didn't actually make much difference to my energy. Um, I took supplements, they didn't make much difference. So I kind of trundled along for 2 or 3 years more. I did stop the career coaching because it obviously wasn't the right thing for me. And I moved into preschool and after school work, childcare work, which was much better. There was a lot more boundaries. It meant that I could come home and just forget about work. But what was happening, I was coming home from a 3 hour session in the morning and I just sat in my chair and couldn't do anything. I just sat and sat there until I needed to go back to work in the afternoon. So there was definitely fatigue there. It was still very mild at this point. But along the line, so I started childcare, and I also realised that I wanted children. I was 40 at the time, so I was very late to realise this, and it wasn't happening. So my partner and I had a fertility treatment called IUI, which isn't you don't have to take as many tablets as IVF. It's less intrusive, and that treatment failed. And a month later, my symptoms worsened. I started to get lots of side symptoms, such as feeling very woozy, very lightheaded. Um, my vision started to be affected. I really struggled with flickering lights. Uh, I should say that it took me about a year to realise the link between these two things. So I went back to the doctor this time, and I was a bit more determined this time. And I also knew that there was help at the hospital for chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm not even sure why I even thought it might be that, but I had an inkling. And I went back, and she said, well, this was 2007 or 8, something like that. And she said, oh, well, I don't know who to refer you to. So she referred me to ended up going to something like the tropical disease clinic at the local hospital.
Oh, wow. I was doing bets in my head. I was placing bets. I'm like, I bet I can figure out where she sent her, but that's not what I was thinking. I was thinking like to a psychiatrist, or that seems to be where a lot of us are sent initially when they can't find something physically wrong with us. Okay,
Yeah.
so tropical disease unit. All right.
It turns out to be, that's what it was called, but it turns out to be the don't know where to send you kind of clinic. So that's what's going on. So the consultant I saw actually did know about chronic fatigue syndrome, and he also checked the problems with my eyes. And he said after 2 or 3 sessions, he said, yeah, we can't find anything else. We're pretty sure it's that. And
that being chronic fatigue syndrome?
Fatigue syndrome, yeah.
Okay.
So they did try to kind of work out what all these side symptoms that I was getting, and I did loads and loads of tests, and they never ever discovered anything for that. They then referred me. I was so picking up all this stuff about nothing can help you. They referred me to a mindfulness cognitive behavioural therapy session, particularly for ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. The other option was the PACE trial.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you here because I'm realizing, my bad, I skipped over something important that gives people some context. I'm sure they can pick it up from your accent and make some guesses, but I forgot to ask you to share with people where you are right now in the world, or where you have been living while going through all of this.
I'll say, so I live in Wantage in Oxfordshire in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
So yes, right. But I do have a Northern British accent for the people who live in the UK.
Okay, they would discern that. I cannot. All right, my apologies for the interruption.
No,
just thought it's helpful for people to know, because different countries and different regions, it seems, have been reacting to chronic fatigue syndrome or ME with different protocols and different responses. So, yeah. All right, okay.
And so my attitude towards this offering from the NHS was like, well, I actually wanted to learn mindfulness, because I might as well do the course. And I did actually start to implement a lot of the mindfulness stuff. I started to meditate, and I found it useful. I also found that there's something called the body scan within the mindfulness, where you lie down and you go through the different parts of your body. And part of the reason I was convinced to do it was because I did that on one day when I was feeling awful from this very lightheadedness and the wooziness, and it went. So that was a real win for me. I had a couple of tools that I felt I could use. And I've been listening to your other recovery stories, and that's so different from your other recovery stories.
In that you feel like you did less?
I didn't. Everybody else is really motivated, and they were really trying, and they were really convinced they were going to recover. And I was like, I just kind of accepted it. I felt, looking back now, I can see I was actually really quite stuck. I can remember, I look back and I think, well, I knew about that and I didn't do anything. So one example was I did find a book one day when I was in the library about chronic fatigue syndrome, and the writer was suggesting that you took this particular tablet. It's quite a well-known book. I can't remember the details. And she said this will help. And I thought about it. In the UK, we have to go to our doctors and we have to ask for medication, and if it doesn't follow the guidelines, well, this is what I thought, I'd have too much of a battle. So I just thought I couldn't face that discussion with my doctor, and I just didn't bother. And I saw a book about 50 recovery stories on Amazon, and I thought about it but didn't get it. And I think my scenario is very, very common. You just like, you just kind of accepting your situation and kind of numbing yourself out to it. I was working 25 hours a week. I started resting maybe for 2 half-hour sessions that day. And with that time and the school holidays, I was managing okay. And that was kind of like any fighter spirit that I've now got back wasn't there. And one of the things I want to bring in about is when I got chronic fatigue syndrome, I looked it up. A lot of people said, oh, yes, I had a virus and I had glandular fever. I didn't have anything like that. So I didn't even know where it come from. And I didn't understand at all what was going on and where it come from until quite close to my recovery, when I found out about the flight freeze response idea, that a lot of the brain retraining, like the gut to the lightning process, the optimal health clue that they talk about, the idea that this instinctive response was, and the terms I use is messed up because I can never remember the technical terms.
Messed up works. I think that about covers it.
And it made so much sense to me, because by that point I was feeling really wired. I knew that my beliefs and thoughts hadn't changed, but I was finding small things really stressful. So the idea that this flight freeze response was kind of sending and controlling all the rest of my body, which it can do, just fitted with what I was feeling. So that was kind of the first part of my jigsaw. But the second part came around the same time, because I read a blog post by somebody who was a complementary therapist, and she said that everybody she'd helped with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, had had a trauma 1 to 2 years or 1 to 3 years before the start. And she used trauma in a very loose sense, kind of like you and I might do. So she was talking about something that was really upsetting, something that you were afraid of. And we're going to come on to it, but the 2 times my health deteriorated were both after traumatic incidences. So the first one being when I had this failed treatment, fertility treatment. That was very traumatic for me. So that bit made sense as well. But then when you look at trauma in a broader view, it also affects your motivation. And my motivation was definitely affected in those first 5 to 7 years when I was just stuck.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm so glad that you brought this up. And Ali, I think you're actually the first person I've talked to that's talked about this openly. And I always get goosebumps during different points of these chats, because it's just, it's really moving to hear people's journeys. And when you said that you imagine a lot of people are in that same boat, where they're just, they're not super motivated. They don't know what to try. They're not feeling like anyone's going to support them in any of these things that they do try. And I thought, what, I'm sure that you're right. And it makes sense, because I think we're all socialized to, when you're not feeling well, you go to the doctor. If the doctor doesn't have answers for you or a treatment plan that's going to work, you don't really know what else to do. Most of us aren't brought up to be empowered to take care of our own health, or to learn about brain retraining or whatever it is that might end up helping us. And then for the people like yourself, I suspect, I would guess, who had a slower onset, it's kind of like that, that old story we hear about the frog that boils himself to death in the water. It just came on so slowly that if someone had just dropped you in your worst moment, you might have had more of a panic response and like, I need to fix this. Mine came on very fast within a week. So it was like my whole life was taken away like this. So I think it brought up that panic in me. But Yeah, I'm just really glad my long thing here is that you brought that up because I suspect there's a lot of other people that are in that boat. And I imagine it's a bit strange watching some of these interviews and seeing the people who are really like, oh, I tried 87,000 things, and you can start to feel like, well, is there something wrong with me? Like, why didn't I do that?
You see, I couldn't even listen to recovery stories when I was ill because I was so jealous of those people.
Mm,
I just felt that they had something I hadn't got, and I put so much pressure on myself and had so much high standards on myself. And this is actually all linked to the trauma in my background that it disabled me. And I don't think I'm the only one. I just want to add in a little bit of science, well, a science study here, because there's
yeah,
something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which was done 10, 15, maybe more years ago. And it shows that there's a link between experiences that are adverse, traumatic in our childhood, and chronic illnesses. And that link is quite strong. And the stronger, the higher you score on the questions,
hmm,
the higher, the stronger the link between the chronic illnesses. And that I thought, oh, okay, that kind of gave. I don't think I was the only one because I think I kind of blamed myself. I felt I shouldn't be
hmm.
ill, and here I was ill. And the trauma picture has given me a lot of compassion. And I hope by talking about it now, it also give other people compassion for themselves because they will understand that it's not something they've done wrong. It's not because they haven't got the willpower, which was one of my things that I blame myself for. It's because they're experience. Some people, the trauma is all in adult life, but I think for many of us, we've had what's called micro traumas in childhood.
Hmm.
Mine was, I have an extreme severe inner critic, and that was because I was heavily criticised as a child, and that's one part of the trauma. So I think it's important to think about trauma in a broad sense, not as somebody who, it's not just about somebody who's lost a parent as a child. It's not about somebody who's was sexually or physically abused.
Hmm.
Trauma is a spectrum, and every part of that spectrum, it can affect your health. It's really key. And yeah, when I was preparing for this, I thought I'm going to have to talk about this. I really want to talk about it, even though it kind of exposes me a little. It's like a bit
Yeah.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I think it's an important part, and I suspect there are a lot of people that it sounds like there are that have that trauma link. It seems like a varied illness, so there might be some people watching that are thinking, I don't know that I have any trauma, and maybe that's not a part of their journey, but for a lot of people. And I did a video a while back. I can't remember now the name of the woman, but I'll link it on the video screen here if anyone wants to check it out. But she also healed herself from chronic fatigue syndrome, and it was through trauma. It was through addressing her trauma, and she defined trauma in a way what I'm hearing sort of, Ali, like how you're defining it. I think a lot of us think of trauma has to be like some severe abuse or, we've been to a war or, but trauma can be many things. On the surface to other people, it might not sound like something that is trauma, but it's just us and our own experience of it. And I know for me, during my recovery, I made a list, of all the things that I felt were traumas in my life. And then I one by one, I addressed them, I had journaled about them, and then I did a lot of visualizations, like going back to those situations and imagining myself handling it, with how I would have liked to handle it. And it was really powerful. So, yeah, I think that's a really important thing to bring up. And many people that I've talked to have talked about their link from trauma to their illness. So, yeah, it's really interesting.
I was thinking about like trauma is if you got a memory from the past
Hmm.
and there's a charge around it that is a traumatic memory.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, unfortunately, a lot of people have had trauma from actually being treated within the health service. So you've got trauma on top of trauma for some people. Luckily, I
That
managed to
is
avoid that.
that is a really
But
good point.
yeah, yeah. Going to hospitals can be quite traumatic as well, I think.
It really can. You're in some of the worst moments of your life, and then dealing with the medical system, like, not putting any blame or shame on anyone, but it can be a really rough experience, really exhausting. Which is another thing why people probably give up and don't keep trying all these things, because by the very nature of this illness, you don't have the energy, you don't feel well. So it's really hard. You're supposed to take on this mountain task of getting yourself better when you're in the worst shape of your life. It's kind
And
of
I
a
think
perfect
it's kind of
storm.
like a double whammy because it was only preparing for this that I realised that my recovery trauma journey is about ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and trauma, because they both, that you'd have to recover from both. For me,
Right.
I recovered from both, and trauma can make you much more defensive. You don't really trust anybody if you've had trauma. There's a bit of element of being very unsure about trust, and obviously that makes it very difficult in certain situations.
So I'm just trying to, Ali, wrap my head around what this whole journey looked like for you. It sounds like it was a slow kind of decline for you, and then it sort of bottom out. How long did this all last, and what did that look like?
So I first went to the doctor. The very first time I went to the doctor was 2005, and I recovered it. But I reckon I had it for maybe a year before then. Obviously,
Okay.
it's hard to tell. And I recovered in 2016.
Okay.
2008 was when I had the IUI. I went back to the doctor, and then I kind of stayed steady along that line. And then it deteriorated about 6 months before the end.
So when you're at your worst with this, what did it look like for you? Like, what was your average day or week like? Were you still working or?
So, so if I just talk about what it was like most of the time for me. So most of the
Sure.
time I was doing this 26 hours of work a week. I was able
Mhm.
to do some exercise. I had to be careful about socializing. I did have to be careful, but I could manage things. So it was mild. The last 6 months, I was able to do, well, first of all, I actually ended up off work for about 8 weeks. I went back to work, but only a third of what I had been doing. And that was only because I'd, I'd done a kind of a whole program to get me back to work. So I didn't do any socializing, I didn't do any Facebook, I wouldn't talk to anybody on the phone. My only contact apart from outside of work was with my partner, apart from through email. I was able to do a little bit of walking, but that's because I put it as a high priority. And my brain fog had worsened a lot. So the only way I was really managing to have any kind, well, it wasn't really, well, as anybody knows, it wasn't, compared to what it had been, it wasn't really a life, but I was resting for about 4 to 5 hours a day to be able to do what I did do.
Okay.
So it was never severe, but it was, there's the scales about, I would say it was about 20 to 30% on some of the scales that you look at, maybe 40%.
Okay. It's important, I think, to appreciate that this happens on a spectrum, and that there are different stages or different versions of this illness. But that being said, that even mild chronic fatigue syndrome, in my experience, because I started out, I don't know, I probably considered moderate for about a year and a half. I could barely get out of bed. But then, for about 7 years, I functioned at that mild state because I improved by about 50%. And it still was, kind of a nightmare. It's better, of course, because you get to do some living, but it's just every day is a struggle, and it's really, really hard.
You've got to be
So
so cautious all the time. You've got to think
all the
about
time,
so much. You
every
can't.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day. And every event is scheduled, is stress. It's like for me, it was everything in my life, everything I had to do, I had to stress over however many few hours a week I was working, whatever it was that was on my itinerary, whatever social activity I might have committed to. It was just, oh, I was just so scared. And sometimes you pay so dearly for doing those things. And it's just, yeah, it's really no way to live. So you talked about being stuck for quite a long time. So how did you stop being stuck?
Well, I think it happened gradually. I was kind of trying to learn little bits about, as you say, about each time I had a disastrous social thing. I was trying to learn how to do that a little bit better. But the baby turning point was when I basically I started to accept that we weren't going to have children. I was very, very frustrated by that. This put a lot of stress on me, and the chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms worsened. My fatigue stayed about the same. So I was very frustrated about the chronic fatigue syndrome as well. And I decided to go and see a counsellor. I didn't know this was the way out. I chose it because I had tried a little bit of counselling in the past, but quite short term. And when I look back now, I don't think I would have recovered without going to see the counsellor. And that's not because it is a psychological illness. I don't think that. I've never thought that. It's because it helped me in some very key ways. So my self-esteem was low. And when your self-esteem is low, and I didn't realise this until it's now got higher, you don't really care for yourself. The self-care of all that you need to do is much harder to do when you don't value yourself. So as my self-esteem went up, my self-care, I just realised I was finding it a lot easier to do all the rests that I needed, all the meditation and things. I started to I didn't realise at the time, but I was starting to value myself more, my health more. As I said, I had a severe critic, really severe critic, and I put an incredible lot of pressure on myself. And I started to learn ways to put a little bit less pressure on myself. It was, I don't think I can really grasp how much it actually has changed me over the time. And obviously, because he was making me do a feel into my body whenever I felt something, this has gradually helped the trauma dissipate. It's not dissipated completely, but even before I knew about trauma, he was using some of the techniques to help me. And I think I kind of knew it was helping me personally. So each time, often I'd go in to see him and I would feel like I was out here. That's where my head was. And I felt very disorientated. And then when I came out of the session, I was back kind of in my body. And for anybody who has this kind of experience, it's so much better when you're back in your body. And I also realised that the day after, I felt just a little bit easier, just a little bit tense. Life felt a bit less of a struggle. So I knew that it was kind of helping me in some way or another. Or that day out of 7, just one day out of 7 was worth it. It was worth going for counselling just to have that.
What prompted you to start going to the counselor? Where did that motivation come from?
I was just so frustrated.
Okay.
I find frustration, I've realised that I use frustration to get me to do things. Other people talk about using hope, but I tend to use frustration.
Forget hope, just get really frustrated.
Yeah. So I was just going to hopelessness. Frustration is a real motivator.
I never really thought about it that way. I always do feel like hope is the fuel, hope is the biggest driver, but frustration is a pretty powerful one.
Yeah. I mean, hope was so far away from me that it
Yeah.
felt impossible. But I felt things could be a little bit better. And I was so frustrated that I managed to break through any kind of reluctance to go and see somebody about that.
It's interesting you're talking about the self-esteem issues too. I hadn't really thought about it in the way that you described it, but I think you're right, because I seriously struggled with self-esteem issues as well around the time that I became sick. And I thought when I look back, like I can think of it in a way like it drove me to take care of myself, but really it wasn't. It just drove me to kind of punish myself, for not being good enough. Like, you need to work out twice a day, 7 days a week. You need to have a really restrictive diet. You need to just be angry and disappointed in yourself all the time. And so, yeah, it's an interesting
Did
link.
you recover from that way?
Through counseling?
Did you recover having that attitude, or did you have to shift all that?
No, I had to shift a lot.
Yeah.
It was a slow process, though. It was
Yeah.
kind of, beaten out of me because I was sick for many years by the time I finally did recover. So, those sort of self-esteem driven perfectionist issues, I couldn't even cater to them even if I wanted to. I wasn't able to exercise. I wasn't able to do any of that stuff. So I kind of just had to let it all go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the counselling was very good for me because it showed that just slow change when you didn't even really know it was happening.
Mm.
was really useful. And that's in a way how I think chronic fatigue syndrome recovery can be for people. It's kind of about holding it loosely.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, not having the driven, I've got to get it right, I've got to exercise, I've got to take all the
Yeah.
supplements. There was a real shift for me over that time, which I'm not sure I can even express in terms of away from being very goal orientated to much more being focused on the moment. And that's something that really helped.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I first attacked my recovery, that first about year and a half, I went really hardcore on it and, just did everything under the sun. And I sort of attacked it in the same way I used to attack exercise and diet and all of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
in this very like feeling like I'm being like the best student or the best patient ever because I'm doing everything to the letter. But I was so stressed out the entire time. So hard on myself. And so it really probably wouldn't have mattered. Some of those things might have had the potential to do more good, but because of my state of mind and my stress levels and that constant fight or flight mode that I was in, it was
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
But anyways, so you went to the counseling and it sounds like that, and the confidence built. So what did that lead you to? How did you start to make recovery strides?
Well, it actually led me to what felt like a disaster at the time because in about April, May 2016, my elderly parents needed to move. And I thought I was doing a bit okay at this point. So I offered to help my family, my brother, my sister. And and then even as early as June, there were signs that it wasn't a good idea. I would go to their house, which is in Lincolnshire. It was in Lincolnshire. It was about 2 to 3 hours away. Go there for a weekend, and I'd just be driven to help them sort out the house because they weren't capable. So I was falling back into my old patterns. By the August, I was starting to get more signs, but I just kept going down. I felt I couldn't negotiate and say, no, I can't do that. They were going to move on something like the 10th of October. And I was supposed to go and help them. The day before, at that point, I was able to cycle to work. It was only a 10-minute journey. On the way home from work, it's downhill. So it's normally, you just get on the bike and there's a bit of flat and it's fine. I really struggled to get to cycle that route home. And when I woke up the next morning, I thought I can't keep going. And suddenly all the stress that I'd been experiencing over the last 3 or 4 months just gave me what I call it a relapse, but it was actually took me much lower than I'd ever been before. So it was like incredibly hard, as you say, when you lose what feels like your life overnight. It's like so tough. I mean, the first few weeks I just lay there, but when I started to get a bit of brain working, I was suddenly frustrated that what had happened and determined. I wanted my old life back. I didn't want to recover. That was out of my kind of vision. I wanted to get back to where I had been because even though that life is hard, as soon as your health deteriorates, it's much harder. And so I started to, and I didn't know really what to do, but I did know that stress had got me into the problem when I had it had to be simple because of the brain fog. I had a very simple philosophy. Well, the opposite of stress will hopefully get me out. So I did all that I could to kind of create what I didn't even think of at this time, to create a healing environment. I was resting an incredible amount, but I was resting, getting up, really, really pacing myself. I was doing meditation. I was going for very gentle walks. I was being outside. I was setting up all these boundaries, which said, well, you might want to talk to me on the phone, but that's not right for me. So suddenly I was able to set the boundaries. Suddenly I was kind of putting my health as the number one priority. So in the past, I might have kind of struggled and said, okay, well, I'll do the washing. Gary. I just didn't do it. I didn't even talk about it with Gary, my other half. I knew he wanted me to be better. So suddenly that dilemma, which a lot of us face, that you think, oh, I really should try because it's hard for him. It was like, I need to focus on my health. And I started to actually go back and look on the internet because I hadn't looked for years about what could help, and I found different things to help. So like the gut program, which I talked about in terms of the flight freeze response. There's a very good website called CFIDS, which is a self-help website set up by somebody called Bruce Campbell, who had recovered. But the whole philosophy of that website is about improving. And of course, this was comfortable for me. So I spent a long time reading up all the different suggestions about taking nano steps, about experimenting each week. I started to sit down and reflect. I did an activity log. And one example of my things that changed, I tried to do, when I'd had my help before from the NHS, I had been given an activity log and I couldn't do it. I found it my critic was so strong about it. Well, now I could do it, and that was obviously help because I now had information about how the days were going. But more importantly than the activity log is I'd sit down and reflect. I'd think, okay, am I ready to add anything in? How stressed have I been this week? So I was taking lots and lots of little steps, and I was getting some improvement. And then, but I was plateauing really, which I was getting frustrated about. Every time I got frustrated or something didn't go well, I would add something extra in, such as I'd do a self-compassion meditation. I started doing visualization. But the thing that really turned the corner for me was I remembered that there's a complementary therapy called Eden Energy Medicine, which I'd heard about right at the very beginning, and I tried to do a little bit. And I'd thought about contacting a practitioner, but because they lived quite far away, I hadn't. But of course,
sorry, Ali, what was the name of the therapy?
Eden Energy Medicine.
Eden Energy Medicine. Okay.
Eden Energy Medicine. It's not very well known, which I think is a real shame. It works with the body's energies, and you can either see a practitioner. So the idea is if you've got a complex illness, it's best to see a practitioner, but also at home you have different exercises to do. When you see a practitioner, they check to see what is out on your different energies using something called energy testing, which was developed by kinesiology. So the simplest way is, you probably can't see, that's probably gone off the side of the screen, is that I would hold my arm out to the side and my practitioner would test to see whether whether my energies were crossing over, and I should get a yes or no answer, which I could feel.
Wow.
So just going to take the yes or no, the crossing over energies. So this very small part of the idea of the concept is that your energy should cross from your left side to your right side of the body.
Okay.
One of the exercises they give you is just doing like this. So I just wanted to show it because I know the energy part of Eden Energy Medicine puts people off. I just wanted to show that it's not too weird. I know some people still think it's weird. My partner does. And so they check to see whether your energies are crossing over. They get you to do this exercise, and the practitioner would check to see if the energies were now doing what they wanted them to do. I'd go off, do the exercises that gave me, and then I'd go back next time, and Angie, my practitioner, would say, okay, that's working. So slowly and methodically, but also intuitively, they just help you work through the energies in your body. They talk about things like meridians, such as the Chinese medicine people do. They talk about chakras, such as the Indian medicine people do, and the aura, and about 5 or 6 more different ones. So it's quite structured and it's methodical. What I liked about it was that I could track that it was improved, that I was improving. I don't know if you ever had acupuncture, but they look at your tongue, don't they, and they check your pulse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of idea, but it's just a bit more visible. I need to lost it there.
No, this is great. Thank you so much. This one is new to me, and it really helps to get sort of a high level understanding of it. And I think you're right. Most of us, I think we are skeptical of things that we don't understand, and I think this one is a tough one for a lot of us to wrap our brains around. But there's a lot of things that have been successful with people that I've talked to who have recovered with ME/CFS that most of us don't understand, but it's worked. So,
Yeah,
you know, I'm always going to embrace and never going to discount something that is helping people. So it's really interesting. And I don't think anyone I've talked to has shared this journey of using this type of recovery. So it's really good to know about this avenue and help get that message out there.
I think I should say that I had actually seen a blog where somebody said it helped people. So it wasn't
Okay.
me going off blindly.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure many people are aware. I'm just not aware in my small
No.
circle of people, but that probably means that there's another chunk of the population that isn't either. So, at least we're helping the people like myself.
Well, what I was really trying to say was that I'm not sure I would have done it if I hadn't seen
Okay.
somebody say that they'd help
Right.
people, because that was the
Right.
piece that had been missing all the 7 or 8 years before, when I'd known about the treatment but hadn't got it.
Okay.
I hadn't tried it, I mean. And the other reason I wanted to use it was because the only brain retraining program I looked at was the gut one. And I, by this stage, knew how complex my brain was. And I couldn't see that I could manage, without getting myself in a real pickle, of just picking up each thought and stopping it if it went negatively. And the Eden energy medicine, I felt, I mean, I was reframing my thoughts, but I
Yep.
knew if I tried to do it 100%, my critic would have just come down on me like a ton of bricks, and it would have been awful. But the energy medicine didn't. I had things to do, but it didn't involve me using my brain.
Mm-hmm.
If you see what I mean. And this was a real
Mm-hmm.
advantage to me.
It's
So
so important too. It seems like everyone says that they have to find something that really kind of like resonates with them and makes sense to them and seems doable. Like something might have worked for 1,000 people, but if it just doesn't fit with who you are and how you're wired, and
yeah, it's true, isn't it? Because it did appeal to me. I'd known
Mm-hmm.
and liked it for years, but I hadn't had the confidence and the self-belief to spend the money, really. And I was just full of so much self-doubt, I think, you know.
So
And
how long? I have sort of a question. The two things I'm thinking about right now. Okay, one. Now, feel free not to answer this, and I'll just cut this part out, Ali, if you don't want to answer it. But I'm wondering if it's okay to share, to ask you how old you are. And the reason I ask this is because I have a Facebook group for people who are recovering from ME/CFS. I'll link it in the description if people want to join. But there's been quite a few comments from people who are like not 20, saying like, does anyone, over 30 recover? It really feels like
yeah.
all the recovery stories are people who are younger. So if you're okay with sharing your age, are you okay with sharing your age?
And I did see that post because I belong to your group.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm 55
Okay.
now. So when I recovered, I was 52.
Okay. It's kind of what I'm wondering, because there's been a couple people who have broached it out and like, is there hope after 50, or are we just done? Like, so it's nice to, there clearly are people who are recovering, but it's just nice to highlight those stories. And a lot of the stories being shared are being shared on Instagram and platforms that tend to be dominated by younger demographics. So it's going to
Yeah.
skew the results that we're having. It's just all we see are the people that choose to share their story on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or wherever. So it doesn't give us a full picture. And it's hard to really represent different countries, a lot of different countries, a lot of different cultures, because, some people are socialized not to share their health journey publicly. So, there's large groups of people that are completely excluded from these stories that are being shared. So anyways, yeah, thank you for sharing that.
It's very interesting that when I recovered and I started reaching out, I found other people who'd recovered from the through eating energy medicine.
Right.
The people who go that route also don't tend to be the kind of people who share for whatever reason, even though a lot of them have become practitioners.
Okay.
So one of the things I did was I put my story on the Eden Energy Medicine official site. I said, can you put my story on there? Because I wanted people to know.
Yeah. I think that's so great. It's really, really powerful. I wonder if people are less likely to share, because I've heard a few people say that there's reluctance for people to share, the method that they used. Some people, whether it's things like the lightning process or graded exercise therapy. And I wonder if it's because some people are met with skepticism or even anger sometimes. So they're like, I'm just not going to put that out there. I don't know. I don't know what makes some people more prone to share than others. And perhaps the energy medicine, if some people are skeptical about this, they're like, okay, I don't even want to go out in the world and have to defend my life and my healing journey.
Once you've recovered, why not just go off and enjoy
life? Yeah. I guess even if people aren't going to give you any pushback, it's just most people probably just want to get on with their lives. Yeah. So what did this recovery process look like? How long did it take? That was the other piece of what I was wondering about the time frame in your life, and how long the recovery.
Can I just say that I'm going to give a really complicated answer, because I think some of my recovery started 10 years before I even got chronic fatigue syndrome.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because in my mid-20s was the first time I realised that I had problems with my self-esteem, and it was the first time I realised that I could change my beliefs. And if I hadn't had that piece, I'm not sure if all the other pieces would have happened. Does that make sense?
It does. It sounds like, like the foundation, you couldn't go up from there. It's been a bit of a building block piece. So without that first step or that first phase.
And there are other bits along the line there, because I was running, I was going to see a doctor, and the doctors were awful about running injuries at that time. And so I broke through that barrier of believing the doctor, or kind of half broke through it. So in some ways, my recovery journey, if I go back to my mid 20s, took just less than 30 years. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when I had the chronic fatigue syndrome, I had it for about 12, 13 years. And I was doing things under the surface, but the actual bit where I really, really focused on recovery was actually only 6 months.
Okay.
But that, in some ways, gives people the wrong impression.
Right.
Because that 6 months, I was using nearly everything I used during that 6 months, I already knew about. I just brought it, I just hadn't used it before in the same kind of way.
It makes me think, it sounds like two other people that I've interviewed come to mind, Jason and Sarah, and they both recovered using brain retraining techniques, but they both said something similar. Sarah had had a good history with meditation, and she felt that and visualization and all this stuff. So she felt like she was just primed and ready to go. So when she got that brain training, she, she could just put it into place like that. And Jason said something similar. He'd had, a 10-year journey of sort of, learning about how to take care of himself and a lot of different things that laid the foundation. So when he got that final piece, he was just ready to put it into action and he was good to go. But had either of them, I don't want to speak for them, but what I heard was that, perhaps if they'd gotten this information 10 years prior or however many years in their story, it wouldn't have been as effective.
Yeah, I think that's true, that it was I was creating this whole culture around me of healing, and I couldn't have done that even 2-3 years before. Just things like holding the goals lightly. And this is when I've been writing about my journey, I haven't. It's only when I start to write about a particular topic, I think, oh yeah, well, I did do that. So, for example, somebody on the Facebook group was saying, or somewhere like that was saying, how do I know when to add something in? And I said, and I thought, oh, I never thought, should I? By the end, I wasn't thinking, should I add this in? I thought, am I ready to add this in? And there's a real subtle difference there.
Okay.
Because, like, one is a bit of a pressure to keep adding stuff in, and the other one is, how am I doing right now in this moment? And it's really focused on that rather than there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that, there's that. And it's overwhelming, isn't it, really? All those different things you could do.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it was like.
So what did it feel like after you said 12 or 13 years, Ali, of
Oh,
struggling with this, like to finally be past it? What was that like?
oh, I was euphoric. It actually happened. We went, oh, this is another piece. I'd had 4 sessions. I wasn't sure whether it was working or not. We went on holiday, and I kind of knew I was able to do a bit more walking than normal, but I thought that was just because of the atmosphere. And it was only when we came back, I thought, I feel different. And my partner just looked at me, and my boss just looked at me, and I thought, I do feel different. And I started doing more, and I thought, nothing's happening. And within, I can't remember how long it took me, maybe it took me only 10 days to start running again. But everything I tried, I couldn't fall over. And this was like, it's like, feels like a miracle, doesn't it? You know, because
It
all those
does.
times when you have fallen over.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, some of the best. Those 2 to 3 months were some of the best 2 to 3 months of my life, really. You know, it was great. I had a back to health party, you know, cooking all this fantastic Lebanese meal for all my friends, and just trying different things. It was lovely.
That's
So I've
incredible.
been running, I've done trekking, which I hadn't done for 17 years. I've been cycle touring, carrying all my stuff. It's like, it's unbelievable, really. It's just thinking about it kind of moves me, you know, because you're giving back, you're giving your life back. Yeah, that's.
I, I still tear up to this day sometimes. I'll just have a really busy day or a really fun day, or I'll go do something really physical and I'll just be laying in bed at the end of the day, just processing my day. And I tear up with just gratitude and, goosebumps. I'm like, wow, like, look what I can do. Look what I can do.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I'm so happy for you. Well, thank you for sharing all of this. As always, if you've seen, I think you have seen some of my other interviews, I always like to wrap up with kind of like what you've taken away from all of this, what you might tell other people who are currently facing this, any advice you might have.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because in some ways I could say, oh, do this, do that, or the other. But I think if I think back to where I was, I think I just would like people, well, I just like to know that, to just feel a bit of compassion for themselves, to know as much as they can, because I know it's so difficult, to know that they're doing as well as they can within their situation, within what's going on, within if they've got trauma, within that, in terms of just to feel a bit of love, self-love if they can, and to know that just by now and again, doesn't have to be big stuff, just looking for one thing that can help them, help how they are, not just the chronic fatigue syndrome, but how they are emotionally and mentally. Um, and I just would want to wish them all luck on this complex journey, this multifaceted kind of 1,000-piece jigsaw. It's not going to happen overnight, but just going in the right direction. Let's hope that many of you listening get there. I just love that. That's why I'm doing this interview, so people can hear what those of us who've had the gift of recovering. We're kind of. I'd love it if you feel we're calling you on. We're calling you on. We're believing in you. That's what I'd love people to hear.
You're going to get me going now. I cannot think of. Thank you. I cannot think of a better message to put out into the world. I think that was just perfect. Thank you, Ali. It's such a rough road. It is such a tough road. And yeah, it's just people really need to be compassionate with themselves and take it
So
easy. And
for them, but yeah, if they can, if they
yeah,
can just hear when somebody says, when somebody sends them a bit of love, if they can just take that in them, inside of them.
yeah. So you have a blog now, right? That you have been
Yes.
tracking your journey. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, it was a shock for me to recover, and I wanted people to know that it was possible, and I wanted
Yeah.
people to know about Eden energy medicine. So I decided to set up the blog, and since then it's kind of evolved because, as I said, I was only starting to like the counselling bit that we've talked about today. I haven't even written about that yet. So there's lots and lots of practical advice on the blog, but there's also this kind of the hidden side, which I think is as important. I called the blog Living an Everyday Kind of Life. And the reason I chose that was because at that time when I recovered, I felt when I went into ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, I felt I needed to be Superwoman. And I wanted to be reminded every time I looked at my blog that the way I recovered was being the complete opposite of Superwoman, was just by trying to live a normal, it's not normal, that's the wrong kind of word, but trying not to strive. So it's called Living an Everyday Kind of Life. The web address, let's hope I get this right, is something like everydaykinoflife.wordpress.com.
Okay.
I'm very happy to be contacted either through the website or through any comments here. Very happy to reply to the if anybody's got any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, as always, looking forward to what people's thoughts and reactions to this. It's always so interesting to see the discussion that comes out of this and the parts that resonate and what people take away from it. So yeah, if you're watching, if you could put in the comments just something that stood out to you or something that is parallels your own experience. It's yeah, let's just keep the conversation going and keep working on this together. And for people watching, if there are any of you who have a recovery story or something about your journey that you'd like to share, you can always reach out to me. My contact information is in the video description. So, Ali, thank you. A million times over, thank you. This was amazing. I cannot overstate how incredible everything that you shared was. I just think it's so valuable and so awesome. And you were so really, I felt very vulnerable and raw and honest about your journey, which is just wonderful. So thank you.
And thank you to you for doing all that you do.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. So yeah, that's it. That's it for today. Thanks to everyone watching. Thanks again, Ali.
Thank you.
And yeah, whatever you're facing, hang in there. One day at a time, you'll get there. Take care, everyone. Okay. I wave a lot. It's a weird, I think it's just a conditioned response. I can't say goodbye without waving. Goodbye, everyone.